In the rolling hills of Massachusetts stands a crumbling relic of the past, Danvers State Hospital. Once hailed as a sanctuary for the mentally ill, it is now abandoned, its walls whispering stories of torment, experiments, and the supernatural. But one investigative journalist will uncover the hospital's darkest secret, a secret that could cost her her sanity. The asylum's dark origins. In 1878, Danvers State Hospital stood as a beacon of hope for the mentally ill. Built atop a hill overlooking the town, its sprawling Gothic architecture was meant to inspire awe. But within a decade, hope gave way to despair. Overcrowding turned the halls into a maze of misery. Patients were subjected to brutal treatments, ice baths, electroshock therapy, and lobotomies. Yet, some never made it to the operating table. They simply vanished. The hospital's chief doctor, Elias Blackwood, was hailed as a pioneer but whispered to be something far darker. Rumors of late-night rituals in the basement and a locked ward where no one returned grew louder. One stormy night in 1892, a fire broke out in the hospital's east wing. When the smoke cleared, dozens of patients and staff were dead, but Dr. Blackwood was never found. His disappearance marked the beginning of Danvers' decline. By the mid-20th century, the hospital was abandoned, left to rot under the weight of its horrific past. The present-day investigation. Rachel Myers parked her car at the base of the hill, staring up at the asylum's silhouette against the gray sky. The crumbling towers loomed like sentinels over the town. She adjusted her camera strap and pulled out a notebook filled with leads. Over the past year, she'd been piecing together stories of disappearances, hauntings, and hidden records tied to Danvers. Her editor had laughed off the idea of an article about an old asylum, but Rachel knew there was more to the story. The locals had warned her to stay away. "That place is cursed," an old shopkeeper had said. "People go in and don't come out the same." Rachel shrugged off the warnings. She wasn't here for ghost stories. She wanted answers. The first clue. Inside, the asylum smelled of mildew and decay. Peeling paint hung from the walls like dead skin, and broken glass crunched beneath Rachel's boots. Her flashlight beams swept across faded murals of serene landscapes, a cruel contrast to the torment that had occurred within these walls. She reached the records room, its door hanging off its hinges. Inside, metal filing cabinets were overturned, their contents strewn across the floor. Amid the chaos, she found a leather-bound journal with Dr. Elias Blackwood embossed on the cover. The first entry read, "The mind is a labyrinth, and I am its architect. To cure madness, one must not fear to delve into the darkness." Whispers in the dark. As Rachel read, a faint sound reached her ears, like the shuffle of feet down the hall. She froze, her flashlight trembling in her hand. "Hello?" She called, her voice echoing. Silence. She convinced herself it was the wind. But as she continued exploring, the whispers grew louder. They seemed to call her name, pulling her toward the locked ward on the asylum's north side. The hidden chamber. Breaking through the rusted gate of the north wing, Rachel discovered a staircase leading down into the bowels of the hospital. The air grew colder, and the whispers became a cacophony. At the bottom, she found a sealed iron door covered in strange symbols. Using tools from her bag, she pried it open. Inside was a circular chamber lined with skeletal remains, their hands bound as if in prayer. In the center lay a stone altar, dark stains etched into its surface. Rachel's flashlight flickered, and the room plunged into darkness. When the light returned, the shadows on the walls seemed to move on their own. The forgotten ritual. Rachel stepped closer to the altar, her breath visible in the freezing air. The carvings on the stone told a story, a depiction of figures bound in chains, their faces twisted in agony. In the center of the altar was a symbol she recognized from Dr. Blackwood's journal, a maze-like pattern encircling an eye. As she examined the room, her flashlight landed on a faded leather-bound book resting on a pedestal near the altar. Opening it, she found more of Blackwood's writings. The final pages detailed a ritual meant to pierce the veil between the sane and the insane, a gateway to understanding the deepest recesses of the human mind. But the veil resists. One passage read, "To tear it, a sacrifice is required, a soul consumed in torment, an offering to the darkness beyond." Rachel's pulse quickened. This was no ordinary asylum. It was a place where madness was worshipped, a playground for a man whose ambitions crossed into the occult. Suddenly, a voice whispered in her ear, "Why have you come?" The presence. Rachel spun around, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. No one was there. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and echoing as if dozens of unseen figures surrounded her. She bolted up the stairs, clutching the journal and her camera. Reaching the surface, she paused to catch her breath. The asylum seemed darker than before, its walls pressing in on her. As she reviewed her footage in the safety of her car, Rachel's heart nearly stopped. In the corner of one frame, a shadowy figure stood at the edge of the altar. Its face was featureless, yet it seemed to watch her with an intensity that burned into her mind. Unwelcome visitors. Back at her motel, Rachel tried to make sense of what she had seen. She scoured the journal for answers, piecing together Blackwood's descent into madness. He had believed the asylum wasn't just a place for treatment, but a conduit for accessing a higher plane of existence. That night, she woke to a loud knock at her door. Peering through the peephole, she saw no one, but a faint shadow lingered just outside. She opened the door cautiously. On the ground was an envelope, its paper yellowed with age. Inside was a single photograph of a patient strapped to a chair, eyes wide in terror. Written on the back were the words, "You're next." The locals' warning. The next day, Rachel sought out the town's historical society, hoping to find someone who could shed light on the asylum's past. The elderly curator, Mrs. Thorne, paled when Rachel mentioned Dr. Blackwood. "You should leave while you can," Mrs. Thorne said, her hands trembling. Blackwood's experiments weren't just scientific, they were spiritual. He believed madness was a doorway, and he was determined to open it. Rachel pressed for more, but Mrs. Thorne refused to speak further. "If you dig too deep, the asylum will take you, just like it did the others." The hallucinations began. Rachel returned to the asylum, unable to shake the feeling that she was missing a critical piece of the puzzle. As she wandered its halls, the whispers returned, louder and more distinct. They weren't just random voices, they were calling her name. Her vision blurred, and she found herself in a room that hadn't been there before. The walls were pristine, the beds neatly made, and patients sat quietly, staring at her. One of them, a young girl with hollow eyes, whispered, "He's watching you." Rachel blinked, and the room was gone. She was alone in the decayed remains of a ward, her camera lying at her feet. The entity revealed. Rachel reviewed her recordings that night and discovered something chilling. In every frame where she was alone, a shadowy figure loomed behind her, growing clearer with each passing scene. Determined to confront the truth, she delved deeper into the journal. Blackwood's final entry read, "The ritual failed, but the veil remains torn. The entity is loose, and it hungers for more. To those who find this, leave, or it will take you too." Rachel realized the entity wasn't bound to the asylum. It was bound to her. The descent into madness. Over the next few days, Rachel's reality began to unravel. She heard whispers even outside the asylum, saw fleeting shadows in her peripheral vision, and felt a constant presence watching her. The journal began to change, its text warping and rearranging itself into cryptic warnings. She tried to destroy it, but each time she burned or tore the pages, it reappeared, pristine and whole. Desperate, She turned to Mrs. Thorne, who reluctantly revealed the truth. The entity isn't a ghost or a demon, Thorne explained. It's the embodiment of madness itself. Blackwood summoned it, and now it's latched onto you. The final confrontation. Rachel returned to the asylum one last time, determined to end the curse. Guided by cryptic messages in the journal, she descended into the basement chamber and performed a counter-ritual described in Blackwood's notes. As she chanted the incantation, the air grew heavy, and the shadows coalesced into a monstrous figure. The entity roared, its form constantly shifting between human and inhuman shapes. Rachel stood her ground, finishing the ritual. The entity let out a piercing scream before dissipating into the darkness. The twist. Believing she had freed herself, Rachel left the asylum. But as she reviewed her final footage, she froze. In the last frame, just before she exited the building, the shadowy figure stood at the doorway, watching her leave. Back at her motel, the whispers returned, louder than ever. The asylum hadn't claimed her. It had unleashed its curse into the world, using her as its vessel. The forgotten asylum remains a haunting reminder of humanity's darkest experiments and the fine line between genius and madness. Some places should be left undisturbed, for their secrets are more dangerous than we can imagine. Thank you for watching Values of the Past. Stay curious and stay vigilant.
Thank you for watching this episode from Valors of the Past. If you enjoyed this journey into mystery and intrigue, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Make sure to turn on the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when our next tale from the past goes live.